Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar this afternoon. My name is David Garvey, and I'm a web portal site content specialist with Southern Illinois University's Center for Workforce Development, and I'll be providing technical assistance this afternoon. This is the second in a series of two on PY 2020 and PY 2021 local performance negotiations. And as you are joining this webinar, please refer to the poll on the screen here with where you are currently situated with planning for your local performance negotiation. And meanwhile, I will cover some of the housekeeping before we go ahead and get started. So this webinar is being recorded and will be made available later this afternoon. If you have any questions throughout, these can be shared in the chat pod here in Zoom. During the Q&A session later, at the end, closer towards the end of this webinar, you'll be able to unmute yourself. And if you join by computer, you can hover over your name and in the participant pod and unmute yourself. If you dialed in with a phone, you can unmute by pressing star and then 6. And throughout the webinar, there will be a couple polls that we will ask you to fill out. And additionally, I will be sharing these, the presentation materials in the chat pod as we speak, if I'm able to do that. Yes, so I will be sharing those materials here shortly. We'll go ahead and introduce our speakers this afternoon. So from the state performance team, we have Patty Schnorr, Technology and Performance Manager with OET, the Office of Employment and Training from Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We also have Mark Burgess with Performance Measures Manager, Office of Employment and Training, OET, also Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and Paula Berry, working with Reporting and Performance, also with the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Additionally, we have a couple speakers today for state negotiations teams consultants. Brian Richard, the Assistant Director of Workforce Development at the Center for Governmental Studies at Northern Illinois University, as well as Andy Blake, Research Analyst, also at NIU. And so with that, I will go ahead and close this first poll here. So we wanted to see where our participants for this afternoon are situated in Illinois by your EDR, Economic Development Region. And so launching this poll now, so if you go ahead and take a few moments to submit your answers to the poll on the screen. Meanwhile, I will be uploading the presentation materials. These will appear in the chat pod, which you can then download. Okay, so those materials are now available in the chat. So I'll go ahead and end this poll for location. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Mark Burgess.
Great, thanks, David. Could you put the next poll up? There's a third one there and back one slide, please. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us on this, the second, as David said, second of two webinars trying to help you prepare for your upcoming local negotiations We did do a poll as we were getting started and a little bit before we started today. Thanks for those that were able to join early and complete that. Looks like the majority of you are in the middle area of, you've been doing a lot of research and planning and are close to submitting your goals from the local area, as well as still gathering information, identifying your team members, and then the next step will be to put those goals on paper and send those in to us. I will note that for those that identified that you have submitted those, you should have got an email from me. We did have a couple local areas, ambitious as they are, to submit those, and I replied to them that we did receive those, but we did ask for some additional information. We'll talk about that a little bit later as far as what we expected, and we apologize if we didn't make it clear about how those submissions should have come in as far as the supporting information, as far as supporting information. So we do ask that those that have submitted already reconsider after this webinar, after seeing the negotiation tool and information contained within it. And it may not change your decisions at all, but it may, because it might be something that you see that you didn't have in front of you before that says, oh, we.
I apologize, Mark. I think I inadvertently muted you as I was letting somebody else in, but.
Okay, I'm back on. I hopefully didn't lose too much of my conversation, but basically, if you had submitted yours before and received an email from me, we did receive that, but we're asking you to maybe reconsider, see the information from today's webinar, utilize the negotiation tool that our folks at Northern Illinois University are going to speak to. And you know, you may not change your mind on any of the goals you submitted, but we just want to have the knowledge that you've gone through this before submitting as final. And for those, there were a couple people indicated they really haven't started yet. Hopefully that's not going to be a deterrent to you getting goals in by the end of next year, which is what we've asked those to be submitted in. If you're having difficulties, whether that be assembling a team, identifying the information and data that you feel like you need to support your goal proposal, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Paula Berry and ask for some help. We're here to help you as much as we can throughout this process. If you can go ahead and pull that poll down now, David, and we'll move on to the next slide. And then as far as looking at where all of you are at, not unreasonable to think the majority of you from the Northeast region, which is houses the majority of our one-stop centers and local areas up there. But there is one that didn't identify someone, so hopefully maybe they just didn't complete the poll, or maybe they someone from that local area isn't on the call. Hopefully they'll get this information, and we'll make sure to follow up with the Illinois Workforce Partnership Performance Task Force tomorrow in their call and make sure that everyone got the information from today's webinar, especially the links that will be forthcoming with regard to the negotiation tool and the download information that David uploaded into the chat for you to get. So we'll go through this somewhat quick because some of this is a repeat of what we talked about back on August 20th. I'm trying not to repeat too much, but we have some questions. We want to make sure everyone's clear in all the variable elements of negotiations going into those calls and afterwards. And you'll note one of the download documents now is a question and answer document. So we will be addressing the majority of questions throughout this webinar without going to that document specific. So if you're downloading it and have a question, hopefully we'll answer it at some point in time during this webinar. We want to show you this statistical, we'll talk about the statistical adjustment model as well as the negotiation tool. Again, Northern Illinois University, Andy and Brian are with us today to speak to those two platforms of information. We'll talk about local proposed goals again. As I mentioned, we want to make sure you're submitting these on time and with the information and data to support those decisions that we expect to see and can use as we prepare for those calls. And then we'll kind of talk about the calls themselves. How will they occur? How will they get scheduled? Who should be a part of those? And then we'll finalize the day with ability for all of you to answer or ask some other questions, and we'll answer them to the best we can today. So we talked about the process last time, and here's just a real short version of what the process is. 3 steps: planning, submitting, and participating. So we expect that you're developing or putting together your team, that you should have no more than 5 people identified as your negotiation team. And what that means is those are the up to 5 people that will be part of the negotiation call. You don't have to have 5. You can have 2, 3, 4. It's really up to you as a local area to identify the appropriate individuals. And then those will go on to the proposal form, which needs to be submitted no later than October 2nd was the date we provided you with the extended time. I should mention that as we spoke last time in August, we weren't sure if we were getting the extension that we requested from USDOL, and shortly thereafter we did get that. So when we get to the new updated timeline, you'll see everything has changed, and that started with information to all of you that the proposal form isn't due until October 2nd. So hopefully there's still plenty of time left for you to discuss among your team and complete that and submit that by the 2nd. Now, that's the negotiation team. That doesn't mean you can't have other people involved, such as your data and your performance people that may not be on the call, may not be available for the call. It could be other people that are very cognizant of the unemployment rates in your area that might factor into your consideration and decision. So you can have a larger team that is planning, but really the negotiation team are those folks that are acting and speaking on behalf of your local area. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the call information. So we then again ask that you submit that form with supporting documentation. So what we expect is if you look at your past history, your past performance outcomes, and you look at the state's performance outcomes or expected outcomes that we negotiated back in May, if that information isn't enough to support the decision you're making on any of the 15 goals, we expect that you would provide us with some information as to why you came up with your decision. And we know everyone's in a different boat. We know some of you are larger local areas with many more participants that affect the state's overall performance in a different way than the smaller local areas that aren't contributing as much to the numerators and denominators on the state level. So you should be taking that in consideration. You'll see that a little bit when we look at the tools. But if the easy information, I'll call it, that's contained in your past performance and our negotiated rates doesn't indicate why you've chosen your rate, we really do ask that information be submitted so that we can look at that. And when we go into those calls, we're much better prepared, and hopefully they're a lot easier conversation when we're discussing them with you. And then the final thing is participate in that call. And again, you can identify a local team, and then those are the people that will be given the access to those calls that will be speaking on behalf of the board. So one thing, I'll repeat it again when we get to those calls, but if your local board chair or your chief elected official is not part of that team that's going to be on the call, is because it's their responsibility to do these local negotiations, you need to make clear who is going to be speaking on behalf of that chair and CEO in these calls, because the calls will end with agreement from the state and the local area on what your 15 negotiated goals are. There's not a process afterwards where you get to go back with a discussion to them and say, okay, what do you think? Do we agree with these as a team now? You weren't able to join the call, but we wanted to get your confirmation. And this is exactly how it went with us when we negotiated with the Region 5 folks. So we will end that call with goals, and those will be final at that point in time. All right, so here's your new timeline. Everything's highlighted because getting the extension allowed us considerable amount of time to do all of these different phases. So we issued this new timeline in a change to that WIOA notice 20-NOT-01. So you should have already seen this, should not be a surprise. Hopefully, the one thing you'll see, and we're not going to issue a formal email to everyone, but we are going to add this webinar on this list so everyone is aware that this is occurring and it's part of the timeline as far as technical assistance we're giving as a state to all the local areas. So that document will be updated either later today or tomorrow, but you won't see anything formal, and that's the only change that will go on there from here. The key ones are that we're giving you in this webinar today the negotiation tool and a Q&A, and there's 17 or 18 questions there that we've been receiving from all of you that we heard in the last webinar. So hopefully that'll answer a lot of your concerns already, but certainly if you have more, we'll welcome any of those during today's webinar, or afterwards you can email those to me. The October 2nd date, again, to reiterate, is when you should submit your performance or your proposed goals. October 13th through the 30th is when we will be scheduling all of these calls, and we'll talk about how that scheduling process will go here a little bit later. We will then, after completion of those goals, we will submit them to the Department of Labor as required by the Act. All 22 of them, they want to hear what those goals are, and so we'll send those in. We'll issue a letter confirming the goals to all of you as well. And then the last step is really on all of you to update your local plans and all your websites that might have performance information. The Act requires that you make that public and transparent, so you'll have to update those. And the November 20th date is the last date of when we got that extension, so we ask that you hopefully can get those updates completed by then. There are 15 performance goals we're going to be negotiating on. Hopefully we can come to agreement on some of these upon receipt of your proposed goals. You know, it'd be great if we agree with all 15 of them, and basically the call is to confirm that, and it can be nice and easy, but we'll be prepared to negotiate all those that the state is not prepared to accept at the time prior to the call. These are not new to anybody. Just want to reiterate what those 5 goals are for the 3 programs: adult, dislocated worker, and youth. And also to remind everyone that we aren't negotiating on the effectiveness in serving employers, which is the 16th performance measure. We're still in a pilot program, and until DOL tells us what measure we as states are going to be held to, we're going to continue to proceed as far as the 2 pilot measures that we chose in Illinois, that the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board actually chose last year, or it might have been the year before. We'll continue in the same path of that and gathering that information and submitting it as part of our annual reports. So hopefully nobody has any questions about what those 15 measures are. I do want to, somebody did ask again, someone said, well, there's 5 measures, or are there 16 measures? And it's really the terminology. There's 5 different measures for 3 programs for the Title I programs, which equals 15, and then the effectiveness is the 16. So you might hear 5 or 16 or 15, and that's just, you know, a matter of how it's being presented. It's all the same measures here in front of you. There are 3 terms that are found in the formal guidance from DOL regarding levels of performance. If you'll move to the next slide there, Dave. And these are expected, negotiated, and adjusted. So expected is what we're gaining from you by submittal of proposed goals. It's the same thing. What are you expecting that you can achieve, that you want to present to the state? Negotiated are those levels either by us accepting your proposed goal or through negotiation on the calls that are your final levels of performance at this point in time for the appropriate program years 20 and 21. And then at the end of each program year, there will be adjusted levels. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the negotiation tools and statistical adjustment model. But utilizing information that we have after the fact, and again, this is consistent with DOL's guidance and how they're going to handle negotiations and levels of performance at the state level, is that we will compare information at the end and determine if there's a need for adjustment of any of those negotiated levels. So that expected might be a new term for some of you. It's the same as proposed, and then adjusted is that after the fact kind of goal. As you, again, continue to prepare for your submittal of proposed goals, we remind you that there are 4 key factors that DOL has asked the states to consider when we did that, and we've asked the local areas also to consider. Compare yourself. You'll see that in the negotiation tool, how you compare across other LWIAs, how you compare in relation to the state's performance history, and as well as the state's levels of performance that we negotiated. And then always keeping in mind that we're asking you to continuously improve to ensure optimal return on investment. Now, that second bullet, we've added a note here, and I'm going to let Andy and Brian speak to that a little bit more, but we found, and we talked to Department of Labor Region 5 in a call with all the states in our region last Friday, and there were other states having similar issues that because of, in some areas, there's very minimal, if not a lack of information altogether. There's some real, anomalies in trying to develop the statistical adjustment model. And so states are choosing a different path. And DOL is in knowledge of that and understanding. So I'll let them speak to that when they present the negotiation tool and close out their part of today's webinar on the statistical adjustment model. At this time, I'd like to, I hope, most of that's refreshment from the last webinar, so hopefully nothing too trivial there. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Andy Blank from Northern Illinois University, as well as Brian Richard is with him to present on the negotiation tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Now, like Mark mentioned, the statistical adjustment model is not being used for negotiations this year because we will need additional time to build that data in a way that is meaningful at a local level. At this point, the adjustment model that was provided to us by the Department of Labor was only made to predict performance at a state level. It's an entirely different picture once we start looking at the situation within states. So we are just not using the SAM this year. We will be adding that next year. Regardless, the Department of Labor still requires negotiated performance targets to be based on evidence, including comparisons to other LWIAs and economic conditions. To help inform the negotiation process, we developed a Wioa performance negotiation tool that anyone can access online. It doesn't require knowledge of spreadsheets or programming. All it requires is a web browser. The tool is designed to help set informed, realistic performance targets by making all relevant data easier to understand. It has information on training program outcomes by participant type over the past 3 program years, as well as economic background on how unemployment rates changed over time and how the jobs available locally vary by LWIA. The next slide, please. There's a sample of what the negotiation tool shows for median earnings and employment rates. This is available separately for adults, youth, and dislocated workers, since each group requires its own set of negotiated performance levels. Here we have trends over the past 3 program years for adult participants. All of these are the actual outcomes for those years as reported in the Illinois Workforce Data System. We have this available for every LWIA and the state so that you can set a target based on how a local area performed over the past 3 years and how that compares to other parts of the state. We don't suggest a standard area to compare to, as that will depend on local judgment and experience. Our goal in providing this tool was to lay every option on the table so that it would be easier to make the most relevant comparisons. We do not want the frame of reference limited to how a local area performed last year or how their neighbors performed last year. Next slide, please. On this slide, we have a preview of how the negotiation tool can help set performance levels for measurable skill gains and credential attainments. Youth participants are shown in this screenshot, but we also include separate views for adults and for dislocated workers. Performance levels for these metrics can be based on how your local area has performed in the past compared to any other areas that you consider to be the most appropriate comparables. It might be a neighboring local area, it might be the state average, or it could be some local area on the other side of the state. All regions can be compared in this data tool just by clicking a few checkboxes. To To help with finding the comparables, the negotiation tool also includes a local scorecard on the next slide that shows how each region ranked by outcomes over the last 3 years. There are separate scorecards for outcomes related to adults, youth, and dislocated workers. For each outcome, we show the LWIAs ranked by performance indicator in program year 2019, along with their performance in PY17 and PY18. We also show a trend line. This simply shows whether the region's performance has been trending up or down over those 3 years. The scorecard is also color-coded by quartile, where green represents the top 25%, gray is the upper middle 25%, and so on. This can help with finding comparables by choosing other local areas that rank similarly or followed a similar trend line. This allows for considerations beyond who your neighbors are. This could allow setting targets for rationale such as moving up a quartile in next year's rankings. In addition to the trend lines and the PY 2019 rankings, you can also see how your local area ranked in PY 2017 and PY 2018. This is shown in the Historical Rankings tab, and it can show how local areas have moved in the rankings. For example, on second quarter employment rates, LWIA 4 was not in the top 25% in PY 18, but they moved into that position in PY 19. Now, some caution is needed when comparing median earnings outcomes, since this will depend heavily on jobs available and living expenses in each region. Another element of the negotiation tool that can help with finding comparables is background information on employment base and unemployment trends. Unlike the outcome data by program years, this information is by calendar year. Although it's not shown in this presentation, we include a line graph that shows how unemployment rates have changed from quarter to quarter, starting with calendar year 2017, ending in the second quarter of 2020, which was the most recent available at this time. As we are painfully aware, there was a spike in unemployment rates in the last quarter, but this affected every part of the state, and you can use that part of the tool to compare how your local area was impacted compared to others. We discourage using the pandemic alone as a justification for setting lower performance targets, but the tool can help show which local areas might have been disproportionately impacted. Next slide, please. Also, this data tool can show the composition of employment in each local area each quarter of the calendar year. By default, we show the second quarter of 2020, but you could go back to a time period before the pandemic, like the fourth quarter of 2019. This screenshot shows the percentage of employment in each local area by industry sector, like manufacturing or healthcare. Note that these are the jobs physically located in a local area. They are not necessarily the jobs held by residents if they commute out. The purpose of this section of the negotiation tool is to help identify potential comparables based on industry structure. Then you can go back to the other tabs on outcomes and see how those other areas performed. Finally, please note that this data tool is ready to use, but it is open to expansion. Within reason, we are open to adding additional features and content. For example, I am currently working on a new function that will show trends in new participants entering programs each week. I'm also planning to add a brief tutorial video to help walk through using the tool, along with a user guide of sorts. As you roll up your sleeves and try out the tool, please be aware that it will take a bit longer for the tool to load the first time you use it, but it should operate smoothly after that. This will depend on your connection speed as well as what's going on with the Power BI server that hosts the data tool. Otherwise, my contact information is listed in these slides and on the negotiation tool itself. If any questions arise as you start using the tool, please contact me and I will be happy to help you through it. Thank you.
And this is Brian, so I'll cover the statistical adjustment model. So as Andy mentioned, we are not using this during the negotiation process. We're solely relying on those data trends that he presented, but we want to emphasize that the adjustment model will be used on the back end to adjust your negotiated targets. So based on your customer mix that you serve, as well as economic conditions, your negotiated targets will be adjusted either up or down based on those data when it comes time to determine whether you met those targets or not. So you see on the bottom, you negotiate now, and we'll change the targets based on the adjustment model that we are developing for Illinois-specific local areas. Go to the next slide. I think back to Mark or Paula.
Yeah, thanks, Brian and Andy. You know, we have to reemphasize, we spoke about this the first time around back in August, and it have kind of come to find out the statistical adjustment model, in fact, does have some limitations. So we just want to make sure people are aware that that's not something that's out there yet. It's really just a negotiation tool, which is information from participant data. And the second thing is that the coronavirus pandemic is not necessarily a negotiating tool. We do understand it's affected all of you, as Andy said, in this last quarter of 2019 program year, and certainly still affecting you in this first quarter and beyond of 2020, which is the first year we're negotiating. And in our calls with DOL, it was the same thing with them, that we don't know how that is going to play out. We don't, want to speculate, and so we should negotiate it as if the COVID-19 is not part of your data and information. I know that's hard to swallow. We had to do it as well. We can't necessarily apologize for it. It is what it is. But they're assuring us that the statistical adjustment model will, as Brian said, on the back end, take into account. So we just have to move forward in that regard and negotiate in good faith that that's going to happen. We did that with DOL, and we will do that with each of you at the local level. So just want to make sure all of your teams are aware that as we start these calls, we'll remind you again that that's not the negotiating ploy that should be presented by a local team to say we've looked at 3 months or 6 months of data and it's so negatively affecting us. Here's our new goal. So we can discuss that more if you have any other questions and want to present that to us. But that's where we're at now with that and the use of the statistical adjustment model. I think before we move on, can you go back about to the slide on the trend line? Go back one more. I want to speak to a couple things. Then I want to open it up to some of the questions we've already received in the chat and any others that have come in. So with this, as Andy said, you can see your trend line. So when you're thinking about your proposed goals, and ultimately when you join the call for the local negotiations with the state, the importance of looking at your outcomes in the past is if you're trending up. Not to say we would expect the exact same trend up for the fourth and fifth year if we put 20 and 21 on top of it, but it certainly shows you've been doing some really good work that we expect and hope and anticipate you would continue on regardless of the pandemic. And so that's what you would be considering as you think of your goals. It isn't that you look at this and go, well, I know I'm going to be lower because of the pandemic, so I'm going to propose a very low goal. Also, as we're looking at these outcomes, as just one example of information you should be using and considering is that, if you're somebody that's performed at a very high level because your population just works best for getting a high outcome, and your output might be in the 80 or 90% range, that doesn't mean we expect that your goal proposal or expect that what we negotiate with you is going to be 90%. We understand that each year is different, but if for that goal, the state's goal is 70%, we do need to and have to ask you to consider the fact that you are one of the higher performing local areas that help contribute to the state's ability to meet its goals. And so your consideration should be that you would continue to keep yourselves in that higher quartile with a proposal. So it kind of relates to one of the questions that came in the chat. If we submit a goal that's exactly the same as the state goal, do we need to submit any additional data or information, or will this information, the negotiation tool, kind of speak for itself? And I would have to answer that to say, I don't think it does speak for itself, because if you are one of those high performers and you're not asking to continue at a high level and show continuous improvement, again, continuous improvement can be in many ways. It's not just a number figure, a figure that we look at. It's, are you serving customers better? Are you providing better services overall? So there's very any number of ways that you can show continuous improvement. And maybe that would be the justification. You would say, I know we've gone from 80 to 82 to 84 over the last 3 years in a particular measure, and we want to negotiate at 72 when the state's level is 72. You would have to tell us why you think you're going to drop such a considerable percentage, and what you're doing from a continuous improvement perspective to maintain, supporting the state in its ability to reach its goals. I hope that kind of makes a little bit of sense. I don't know, Dave, if you can open phone lines also while I'm going through these chat questions, if I need to clarify myself a little bit. But it's really, multiple part process to look at this outcome data, to look at your particular data available in the tool, and look at your local area. I think the information I would be looking more for, one, is if your goal doesn't seem consistent with your past outcome, you would have to justify that to us with some information to consider. But second, if something's going on within maybe your data doesn't show a huge event that is going to be ongoing. And I know that kind of sounds like COVID, but we all have dislocations throughout the year. Some of them affect our performance more than others. Maybe you've got a particular population that is affected more, and it's going to affect your ability to meet any of these measures. Things like that are what we're looking for in your submission to consider. Because if we don't feel like you provide us enough information, or we at the state level receive no information to support it, all we have is your goal itself, it's probably going to be a little bit more difficult for us to accept it, and that means we're going to go into a negotiation on that measure. So without asking for dozens and hundreds of pieces of paper of information, data, and any other supporting documentation, we ask that you provide us what you think is necessary to support your goal measure when it's just not evident by looking at these trends and looking at the state measure. Another question, each LWIA affects the state's, that's my response, sorry. Does the tool include unemployment rate by LWIA? If so, can that unemployment rate be provided by race, ethnicity, and age? And Andy, can you speak to what's actually included in that tool?
Yes.
As far as the participant data?
The negotiation tool does include unemployment rates, but it's the unemployment rate for the LWIA as a whole. It doesn't dissect by age or race. Now, the statistical adjustment model will include some consideration for the demographics of people served by the local programs, but we don't have unemployment rates specific to each of those groups.
Great, thanks, Andy. And I think if that information is available from IDS. I think when you produce unemployment data for a particular local area or economic region or state, you can break it down by a lot of these particular participant or individual characteristics. So you could say, well, our population, the race and ethnicity, age is all an issue. You could probably even look at that from your WIOA population. Since that's not in this tool, that would be the information I would expect that you would submit with your goal, that you've done that homework, that you've included in your decision on what your goal level would be, your proposed goal level would be. And so you would provide that to us so that we have that in front of us as we're considering to accept your proposal or go into the negotiation. So that's a good example of some information that's lacking in this tool right now. And as Andy said, we're going to continue to try to build this out. Some of the information may not be available and useful for these negotiations, but certainly as we go forward in the statistical adjustment model and in future negotiations, we'll continue to build on this process and take into consideration all your questions and recommendations. As far as when will the tool be available, it's actually available, and I will show you the website that you can go to get it as one of my last slides later on. We'll show you where the link is on the Illinois WorkNet. And then, Andy, have you tried the tool and the links at all in different browsers to see if there's any one? I've used a couple different ones that seem to come up okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean one is better than the other.
I have used it I have only tried it in Chrome, but my understanding is that the Power BI platform is designed to work. It should work regardless of browser. I also, just out of curiosity, tried it in mobile, and everything displays fine. It's just harder to select things in mobile. So we encourage you to use PC regardless of which browser is being used.
And then when you go to see these scorecards on the tool, actually, you'll select, if you go back one more slide there, Dave, for me. Nope, maybe it's further back than that. Let me, it's the first one there. So you'll go to this is what the page looks like when you see the browser. And again, that'll be available on Illinois WorkNet. But then you exit this screen through this download, the actual scorecard, and that's a representation of an Excel spreadsheet that Andy and I put together. We recommend you actually download that document rather than try and view it on your browser, only because it's just kind of a little bit different. And depending on how many screens you have open, what you have going on with your computer, sometimes it bogs it down, whereas if you download the document itself, you'll have it for that day. But keep in mind, there may be some updates to that, so you might have to re-download it at a later date if there's some new information added to it. The question is, when we propose, or when the local areas propose and negotiate goals, are we proposing and negotiating different goals for 2020 and 2021? No. These are grouped together, so when you make your proposal, when we agree through negotiations on goals, they're for both 2020 and 2021. Now, my understanding, and I don't know, hopefully Paul was able to join us. I know she had some conflicts today. My understanding is that there is a potential for renegotiation after the first year. I don't know what that looks like, and don't quote me on that. We'll find that out. We'll add that to the Q&A, so you'll be able to see a response on that, on whether 2021 can be adjusted. But right now, you're negotiating for both program years. Next question is, should the debts, which is the dislocation system, come into play if we show 12 to 15 layoff events within the last 12 months or so that could affect quarterly employment rates? I think that's where I would certainly think that's where you're taking COVID out of the mix, because those dislocations, that they started occurring 12, 15 months ago, were pre-COVID. So that's a trend in your local area that we know you should be considering. So you should provide that information to us. We all know it. Just because there's a dislocation in the first quarter of 2019 doesn't mean we're done with it in the second quarter of 2019 or even 20 or 21. So, every event affects us differently and for longer periods of time. So certainly if you think you've had some dislocations over the past 6 months, year and a half, that you want to consider, that's the information we're looking for to include in your submission. Next question is, will there be incentives for program 2020? We don't know that yet. As you know, if you're part of those that receive the information on incentives, there was a decision made jointly by the Illinois Workforce Innovation Board and Title I program that oversees statewide activities, that there would be not be any incentives for the most recent program year for which they would be eligible. Because of COVID, we're putting those dollars out directly to the local areas in grants. So depending on the length of COVID, might be a key factor in whether there's going to be incentives in the next negotiated program year that incentives might apply to. So we will just have to wait and see if, after each year, whether there's going to be incentives. We can't guarantee one way or the other. We always have to look back at the end of the year and determine whether there's funding available to give incentives, how much is available, and what the criteria looks like. So, we'll keep in touch with you and let you know at the appropriate time once we're able to talk with the board and internally as far as the funds that would be available. I think that's all the questions I saw in the chat at this point. We'll go ahead and go to my next slide there now after the statistical adjustment model, and we'll move on with the presentation. We'll have another opportunity for questions and answers at the end, and also just continue to put those into the chat pod, and we'll address them at the end as well. So back to the goal proposals. Again, these are due on October 2nd. We ask that you provide the supporting data rationale with the form, not separate, so that we have one package. We're not receiving these in two different submissions. And until we have all of that, and until, I would say, if you're one that feel very confident with your goals, your goals without any supporting information, that you think they speak for themselves, that if we look at your past performance outcomes and we look at our state model, our state level negotiations, and we can justify your proposal and accept those, then I would indicate that in your submission, in the email, body of the email, to say, we're submitting this without any supporting documentation. We think it supports it. I returned back one of them. I just indicated that because we didn't receive that supporting information, we would really rather you see this webinar, play with the tool a little bit, download it, look at it, have a better understanding of what should be considered as you submit goals, and then resubmit those. Now, you might not change any of those because you've seen additional data and made further considerations, but I did want to give the opportunity for everyone to utilize this before they submit. So for those LWIAs that have submitted, I do ask that you resubmit, and if you're not changing them and if you're not providing data and rationale, just indicate that, and we know we'll move forward with that in scheduling. But until we receive that email with all the supporting information, we won't be scheduling those calls again until we receive that. We need these to be signed. It's kind of like a memorandum of understanding or other formal documents that are signed by the LWIB chair and CEO. We do need their signatures on these. So please make sure that they see the goals being proposed. If they're not part of that negotiation team, we recommend they're part of that, but we do understand sometimes there's conflicts, and so they appoint other members to act on their behalf in these negotiations. But make sure they are seeing these goals and signing these so they know what they can expect, because again, the process ends as far as negotiation when we close that call, not days or months afterwards. And then finally, as I mentioned, we'll schedule those calls once we get these in, and it's kind of a first come, first serve. But, we do want to make sure we're flexible. We want to make sure that you're all flexible as well. So when I reach out to you, or whomever in our office reaches out to you, we'll probably ask for maybe 3 different dates of the available dates still left on the schedule. Take a couple days to look at that, to kind of coordinate with others that are incoming about the same time, and make sure that we don't have any conflicts. But we will be as flexible as we can. Right now, we've got those penciled in to occur at like 9 o'clock every day and 2 o'clock every day. So we're going to try to do 2 a day. That gives us time to not only prepare for each of the calls, but also attend to other business that we might have during that 3-week period of time. We're doing 22 of these, not one. So we have to make sure we're prepared for each of them on an individual basis with the information specific to that local area. So there may be a need from a local area or even a state level where that 9 o'clock slot might need to shift to 10. We'll certainly discuss that with you. Let me know if you have issues with a 9 or a 2 o'clock start time. We're giving 2 hours for these. Go ahead and go to the next one, Dave. I'm already starting on that one. Yeah. We're giving 2 hours for these. We don't anticipate any of the calls will take 2 hours. Certainly those where we accept some of the goals indicate that at the beginning of the call. Will minimize the amount of actual negotiation that we'll have to have. So each call will be different, and it'll all be dependent on how many goals we're going to negotiate and how many we will accept at the beginning. So the nature of the calls themselves will be fairly structured. We want to, be consistent across 22 local areas. So we will make sure that we're opening and closing in the same manner. So we'll start with introductions. We'll have let you know who's on our team at the state level. We'll ask that you announce who all are on your state team that were able to join. You've indicated that already on the actual proposal form, so we'll know who it is, but maybe somebody's unable to attend the call at that point in time. So, but we want to know who's on there. And we really want to know who is going to speak for the local area. In the majority of these calls, if I'm on the call, I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the state. That doesn't mean my teammates at the state level won't be speaking at times. If there's a negotiation going on and there's information that needs to be shared that someone else has knowledge of, then certainly they will have the ability to speak up and provide that, so that our entire team is understanding, as well as the local area is understanding of where we're coming from in the actual negotiation and either proposal or counter proposal. And we allow that for you as well at the local level. So, while we ask for one spokesperson, anybody on that call can speak up at a particular time. But the key to the spokesperson and the lead, and it could be the same as the lead, without confusing terms more. On that proposal form, we ask who the lead is. That's the person we're emailing everything to. The local board chair may not want to be included in all that, so we might have a different lead than we have as a spokesperson. But we have one person from the state and one person from the local area that will say, here's my proposal, here's my counter proposal. We as a local area are in agreement. We want to hear one voice so that we're not confused. And hopefully your teams are all on the same page, but in the event there's, maybe a little dissension, but you have to come to some agreement, we want that one person to tell us who that is, or we want to know who that is up front. And they're the one that is going to actually agree on the goals as we move through that process. In the opening conference, we'll talk about the call itself. We'll reiterate some of these points that I'm speaking to today. There'll be some information that's allowed, such as what you've submitted to us. So you can bring that up again and say, here's again, want you to remind you what we submitted, and this is why we think our goal is a good goal for us and achievable. And there'll be some information that we are going to indicate may not be allowed, such as the COVID. That just isn't a negotiating ploy at this point in time. We'll trust that Sam is going to take care of that later. We'll do a kind of back and forth proposal, counter proposal. Hopefully we don't have to do that too often, but we do recognize that you're going to come in with a goal. If we don't agree with it at the beginning and indicate that when we get to that goal, then we'll counter offer and you'll have an opportunity to kind of speak among your team and come back with your proposal. And hopefully it's very simple and we don't have to go back and forth too many times on too many goals. But again, that's where the allotment of 2 hours will allow us to do what we need to do. We want to come to agreement on goals that you are comfortable with and that we are comfortable with in achieving all the best for everyone here in Illinois. So we will have some back and forth on some of those goals. At the end of the call, we will go over all 15 measures. We will repeat what we agreed to. You as a team, through your spokesperson, will agree that that's what we negotiated. And at that point in time, those are the agreed upon goals. This isn't going back out to the chair or the CEO for consideration. If they feel they need to be part of that, then they really need to be on the call at the time we hold it. So take that into consideration as you schedule and consideration of who is on your team. If they're allowing somebody else to act on their behalf, then that person has to be given that authority to negotiate and come to final agreement on a goal. And then we will confirm those goals in a formal letter within 10 days so that you can see those. It'll go to the chair, CEO, and anyone else identified as the lead to share among your partners and your local board and put on your website. So with that, I've got one more slide because I know you're curious about where you can get this tool, and I know this doesn't turn out very well. So I'm going to try to do something here and see if I can bring up the screen. But we have updated the WIOA Performance and Transparency page on Illinois WorkNet with more information. It houses recorded webinars. So the left side is just the top of the page. That's what the banner looks like. The second on the right is really a section within that page that talks to negotiations, the local negotiations. And I'm going to try and share my screen so it's a little bit easier. So this will kick you out, David. I apologize, but we'll come back to it. Give it a moment to load. So here's the page I'm speaking to on Illinois WorkNet, where you have a lot of information on performance, transparency. We continue to build this out, as well as some other areas on Illinois WorkNet with just more information about performance, making it transparent as possible. Here are past performance reports that have been submitted to DOL. We are working on adding information on a quarterly and annual basis because we have to report those to DOL, so we're going to make that available on this website. But if you scroll just a little bit further down, you'll see the page I was talking to. So we've got our state negotiated levels here. You can see here now where my mouse is this actual negotiation tool, and there's a link here. If you click on that, it will take you to that page that Andy was talking to with all the various boxes, and then the link also to the actual scorecards. Your Q&A is here. If you have any additional questions you'd like to submit for consideration, please submit those to me. We'll develop the appropriate answer, and we'll submit that back out to everyone through this Q&A. So, keep coming back to this page. Once you get to this, bookmark it, go to it every morning, once a week, whatever, so that you can see what updates are made. If these come in and we have a large number of them after this webinar, I don't think we want to keep sending out emails to everybody saying there's been an addition to the Q&A, or to the link, the tool itself. What we can do, I think I'll ask WorkNet right now, can we put dates on the back of these so everyone knows if they've got the most current, especially with the negotiation tool? We'll put the active date or the most current date on this, so you'll see if you open this up, you'll say, oh, I've already got that version. There's no reason to open it up or download it and replace the one I have already. And then we've got links to the webinars. We'll add the link here in this coming soon page. Once we're done with this one and Illinois WorkNet is able to create the actual recording, as you see over here to the right, this is the first one we did back in August. It's available. Anybody that wasn't able to join us then, unable to join us from your team now, we're going to make these available so you can gather the information and hear what was discussed during these webinars. All right, so we'll go back to the PowerPoint, Dave. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions we should be answering at this point. Question is, how do you want the supporting documentation submitted? You know what? We discussed this and didn't want to limit anyone. We hope that however you choose to submit to us is easily viewable. So maybe, Word documents are okay. Maybe a PDF from a Word document, PDF from an Excel if it doesn't extend too far out. So, use your best judgment. We didn't put that into any guidance as to how we want to accept this. It might be a learning curve for us and learning experience that we change in the process next time around. Once we get these and we determine that maybe there's a version of a document that would be best for us to receive these. So right now, Word, Excel, PDF, just attach those into the email with your proposal form. And then as far as whether you submit information on every measure, again, back to what I spoke to earlier, it's really up to you to determine if you think your past outcomes, comparing those to the state's goals, having knowledge of where you're at on those quartiles of those past outcomes is justified in and of itself. If not, then I would say add information. It's probably best to say you can't supply us with too much information, but you might supply us with too little information to consider accepting initially, as opposed to going into an actual an actual negotiation on a particular measure. So leave that up to you again, whether you think each measure requires information to support it or not. The proposal form is part of the actual policy out on Illinois WorkNet. It's not in itself linkable, because when we put WIOA notices and we put attachments with policy, they're considered attachments or something of that nature. But we'll, before we're done here, hang on, I'm pulling that up. I'll give you a link at least to that policy. The problem with giving links to policies is the way that our e-policy system, for those of you who are familiar with, is set up, is that the link is not like a consistent link that will forever stand. So while that link with the 201 would work and get you to the negotiation site now, it may not work tomorrow if we add something ahead of it, because that number would shift in accordance. The 201 is like the 201st page in our e-policy manual. So if we add pages, this page may become 202 or 210 or 300, depending on what we've added. So when you go to that link, go to e-policy, look to the right, you'll see notices. There's 3 documents there now. One of those is that proposal form. So hopefully that gets everyone where they need to be to download it. If you're having problems finding it, just email me and we'll send the form out to you immediately. So someone's indicated it may take a while to get chief elected officials' signatures. We do understand that. What I would say is 2 things. One, you know, we're in this mode of working electronically, working remotely. There's been discussions for MOU purposes and other signature requirements, how you know, when an electronic signature or how to utilize the you know, electronic signature ability. We understand that maybe this will prevent some of you from submitting your form by October 2nd. Just indicate to me, email me and let me know that you're going to be remiss in meeting that date because of signatures or any other reason. Just let me know what that is, and we'll take a look at that. And if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know. Again, we're here to help you throughout this process. We're not here. We certainly don't want any of you to fail. But we have to meet our measures as a state, and we really have to be cognizant as a state workforce system overall, how all of us work together in achieving goals across systems even. So, you know, just keep that in mind. But we're here to help you if we can be of any assistance. Will the conference call be available for the team to be in other locations? The calls are going to be just a call in. It's not going to be a webinar. It'll just be a call. We'll give you what the call number is, what the passcode is to get into that call once we schedule those. So once we agree upon a date and time, then we'll send you out that information as we put it on our calendars. So, you know, you'll share that with your team, negotiation team. How you want to conduct your internal discussions will be up to you. We anticipate that you'll want to have your own discussions silent of us hearing those. So, you know, however you want to set up doing that, whether you want to set up a second phone line for all of you, put yourselves on mute when you're away from us, use a webinar platform to discuss amongst yourself, have data up. You know, it's really up to you how you're going to handle your team conversations. In our first conversations, that's what we did. We talked amongst ourselves, and then our spokesperson, if you will, came back with our proposal, counter proposal, and an agreement. So, you know, come up with your own, be inventive with your ideas of how you're going to speak amongst yourselves, but you'll have one phone call number into us that will give all of you access to our call. Yes, someone's asking who do all these documents get sent to. All of them are sent to me. Questions are sent to me. Paula will be helping me. Paula Berry from the performance unit will be helping me respond to them, but send them to me and we'll document, especially when you've sent your proposal form, we'll document that we've received it, indicate to you that we reviewed it, and it's within our minimal guidelines as far as submission, and that we're ready to schedule a particular date and time. All right. Yeah. Sometimes these links, Dina indicated she went to the PowerPoint and the link to the tool is in there. Some of these links you can't just click on it and open. Sometimes you have to hit Control and then click on the link. I don't know, why they're different in some documents versus others. So if you're having difficulty getting access to that link, I would recommend you go to that Illinois WorkNet Performance and Transparency page, because the link there should work, again, either with a simple click, double click, or control plus click that will get you there. So if you're still having trouble, just let me know, email me, and we'll get you out the information you're looking for. Okay, so LaDonna's indicating she's looking at the scorecard. Glad you're all out there downloading and playing with it a little bit and finding some questions now while we're on the call. If we feel there's quite a few more questions with regard to the tool that are left unanswered, if you feel like you need some assistance getting walked through that, email me. If we see that we have a good number of people that still want some assistance on that tool, then we'll maybe coordinate a very short webinar in the next several days to walk you through that tool in a little more detail, all the components that are held within that. We can even speak a little bit more about how maybe they can, be considered, how they should be considered as you're submitting goals and also entering into the negotiations. So I had trouble initially downloading that document. I had to reboot because I think I had too many screens open up, and it was bogging down my computer. It wouldn't open up at all. But once I rebooted and reset everything, it opened up, and I've been able to use it ever since. So try a couple different things there, and if you're still having trouble, let me know, and we'll get you a different link, and we'll also get you on our list of potentially doing a webinar to walk everyone through this. Okay, so the trend line should be there. I see that as a question, Andy. I've got the actual spreadsheet open. Oh, no, if you're on the online version, that's the limitation to the scorecard. If you're viewing it online, for some reason, it takes the trend lines and makes them like it's white font. So they're there probably, but you can't see them. So that's another reason why we would recommend you download the scorecard rather than look at it online. However,
the web preview does not like displaying those.
Yeah. So we apologize that there's a limitation there on the viewable version online. But all you have to do also is the trend just says it. We'll use, because I'm looking at the adult outcome second quarter. It cuts off some of the wording there. So again, another limitation. I think part of that is just because I've got a webinar going on. I've got a couple other screens opened up that I was sharing with you. My computer just can't keep up updating this, and so it's not even giving me all the words as far as what measure I'm looking at. But as an example, I can look at one of these OEs and I can see, their measure goes from 85 to 83, so that would be a downward trend, and then to 82, which is a further downward. So you have two downward trends in the trend line, whereas another one I look at is at 78, goes to 75, so you'd have a slight downward trend from 17 to 18. But then they were able to correct things and got up to 86% in 2019. So you have a fairly sharp increase from the 18 to the 19 outcome. So it's a simple visual, but really the numbers are what you're looking at, because if you've got large changes, you want to really kind of understand why you had that, and is it replicable to 2020 and 2021. Even if you had a slight downturn, you might have reasoning for that and know what occurred in that particular year, in program year 18 or 19, wherever the downturn was, and you've corrected that. So you could propose a little bit higher goal, understanding that you have measures in place, you've got new strategies, you've got maybe it was the fact you had a large turnover of staff that affected your ability to serve customers effectively. That's just an example of something we might hear from someone. But you've corrected that, you've done some training, you've utilized some state level training, and you think you can overcome that in the next program year. So those are the things you should be considering as you're going through your conversations. So hopefully that answers all the questions I see in the chat pod at this point. Again, all proposals come to me. You can CC Paula to ensure that one of us gets that, and we can respond back to you as quickly as possible once we've had an opportunity to discuss it. We will be on the Illinois Workforce Partnership call tomorrow. They've got a performance task force call tomorrow. We're going to be on that. So if any of you are part of that team, prepare your questions for us to respond to tomorrow. If you're not on those teams, but you know who represents your local area on those teams, and you still have some questions, submit them to your team member. And if I get any in email, we'll try to respond to those in that fashion as well during that call. But again, if we feel it's something that everyone can find value in, that'll help everyone and assist them in coming to agreement on a goal, we'll add it to the question and answer, and we'll update that, and we'll let you know through the date on it that it has been updated. At this point, I think that's all of the questions I see. I apologize if I happen to overlook one. I don't know if David or Andy or anyone else sees one that I maybe didn't respond to, but I think I've responded to all of them in the chat pod. We appreciate all of your attention to this. We look forward to hearing from you through the proposed form. Here's my information again. Please submit all of your information and questions to me. And we look forward to the upcoming negotiations. As you're leaving the webinar, please complete this. We hope we did well for you. We hope you're better prepared to take the next step in your negotiations. If you kind of are still having trouble and concerned and have a lot of questions, reach out to us. We'll help you. Thank you, everyone.